So this is an interview for the Voces Oral History Project. Today is March 16, 2017. I am Vinicio Cinta. I am in Silmar, California with Robert Alaniz. Mr. Alaniz, thank you so much for granting us this interview.
Thank you.
If at any point you want to take a break and you want me to stop the camera, please let me know.
Okay.
If there are any questions you would like to skip or not answer, also let me know and we'll move on. Okay?
Sure. Sounds like fun.
So we'll begin talking about your background. So can you tell us where are you from? How was it growing up?
So I am originally from Corpus Christi, Texas, born and raised. Most of my young adult life in South Texas. Went to school, local high school. I always say my one claim to fame is that I went to the same high school as Eva Longoria, except I graduated a few years before she did. Probably when she was a kid, I graduated from high school. Was very engaged in local politics for years and years and years. My family was very active in the Democratic Party. Back then, Texas was pretty much a solid Democratic state at the local level, state level, national level. And because of that work, I worked on a lot of political campaigns, including gubernatorial campaigns. So while in college, working as a student volunteer in the state capitol, working with the governor's office, right after, sorry, cut. Very early on, because of my political activism, I gravitated towards a new political party in Texas, the Raza Unida, and was very active in the local chapter in Corpus Christi, Texas. There were a number of us in my generation in college who were dissatisfied with the direction that the power that had been there for a long time, the Democratic Party, was not really servicing the needs of the Latino community. And so that included lack of education opportunities, poverty was still prevalent in the Rio Grande Valley, healthcare was still a major issue. And so because they had been in power for such a long time, yet we hadn't seen any movement in the positive direction, we decided that maybe the Democratic Party wasn't for us, and so we created Raza Unida with the intent of creating a people's party that was more in tune with the needs of the Latino community. Of course, the Democratic Party was up in arms over us creating this third party. They were the party that represented us, and we said, well, if that's the case, why are we still where we are today? Nonetheless, it had a good run. We sent a very strong message. Our first gubernatorial candidate was Ramsey Muniz, who was also from Corpus Christi, Texas. I graduated from Baylor, had become an attorney, and was a very charismatic individual. So a lot of us gravitated towards Ramsey, and were very active then. And it was interesting because there was a generational gap. My parents continued to be Democrats, and I was part of Raza Unida. And of course, eventually that party went away, and some of us came back to the Democratic fold and became active members again in the Democratic Party. And it was that what led me to being very active on statewide politics and working for a short time in the governor's office. It was about that time that I decided to want to expand my wings and my vision of the world, and was actually looking to leave Texas, not because I wanted to get out, but I wanted to see what else was out there. I had two job offers at the time. One was to go into work in Washington, D.C. with the Department of Labor. The other job offer that came in right about the same time was coming to California to work for the Miller Brewing Company in the area of public relations. Well, the choice was easy. I was 25 years old, and I could go to Washington and spend winters there and pay my own way to get there, because the government doesn't pay you to go work for them. You have to actually, if you're going to go work first time, you have to actually pay your own way to get there. And Miller was offering to pay to move all of my furnishings, my car, everything, and plus I was going to have an expense account and all the beer I could drink. So it was an easy choice. I moved to California in August of 1978. I spent 3 years as the PR director for Miller Brewing Company, so I had oversight over California and some of the western states in terms of public relations activities. It was probably the most fun job I ever had, because I was doing things like sponsoring volleyball tournaments and golf tournaments and cross-country races, and very active with the Long Beach Grand Prix. And so it was a fun job for someone who's 25, 26 years old and a bachelor, and of course I had all the beer I could drink. Now, what was interesting, sideline story, is I wasn't a big beer drinker, but I did have a refrigerator in my office that was stocked every day with beer, and I remember the person who would stock it say, "You don't drink a lot of beer," and because I wouldn't touch it during the day, but they promoted it, and I didn't necessarily do it, but it was a fun job to have. Then in 1981, I had an offer to move to Milwaukee. They wanted to promote me to go to Milwaukee. And if you've been in Milwaukee in wintertime, as much as I love the city, it's not somewhere you want to be during the wintertime. And about that same time I had to make that decision, I got a call from a very good friend of mine who was a weatherman at the local CBS owned station, who was a fellow Texan, Michael Perez, that there was a job opening at the local station for someone in public affairs, and would I be interested? And so I said, well, gee, I've never worked on the television side, let's do it. So I interviewed with Jamie Bennett, who's the vice president of the local station, and Joe Dyer, who's the head of public affairs, and they both liked me, and within a week they made me a job offer and I accepted. So I reluctantly left Miller Brewing Company. They didn't want me to go, but I wanted to stay in Southern California, and so I did. And so I went to work at the local station, then KNXT were the call sign letters. That eventually became KCBS when they made the transition over a few years later, and I was there for that period of time. But became very active, became very knowledgeable in television, become part of the news team. We would meet on a daily basis with the news team to provide input into the daily news schedules, stories, provide story ideas, because we were kind of the face of the television station in the community. We gave them lots of information as to people they might need to talk to, stories that are developing out there that you wouldn't normally see a press release or media advisory on. So we became an integral part of the news team. And so during that time, I also was elected by my colleagues in the industry to become president of CALIB, the California Association of Latinos in Broadcasting. It was made up of some of the early pioneers who were in broadcasting. Jay Rodriguez, who was also with me with NHJ, Pete Rodriguez at KBC, Ray Gonzalez at KTLA Channel 5. These are all people who were involved in broadcasting in some form or fashion. And so our members included technical people, people who were in the background, directors, producers, so forth in television, people who man the cameras, the E&G camera members, and people in public affairs. And so the idea was to provide an advancement for Latinos in broadcasting, radio, and television. The one big fundraiser we had every year is we do a big luncheon where we honored Latino sports celebrities. So every year we'd do a big fundraiser and we'd sell out on tickets, and it was a big fundraiser, and we'd use that money to create scholarships for students wanting to get into broadcasting, and that was kind of our involvement. It was through that. Do you have a question?
Yes, I mean, I didn't mean to.
No, please interrupt anytime you want to ask a question.
So, based on your experience when you got here and you started, when you started working with CBS, with the local, so how many Latinos were working in the field at that moment?
You know, there weren't a significant amount of Latinos working in management or necessarily behind the camera. There was a good number of Latino talent at the time. Nowhere near the numbers we see today. And, you know, we continue to seek more and more Latino involvement, both in front of the camera and behind the camera. So one of the reasons we had the scholarship program is to start producing those people in broadcasting who were going to be coming in at the entry level and hopefully would start to work their way up the hierarchy. So we didn't really see that many folks, you know, in management. And that was just because it was a closed system. You know, lots of times it was who you knew. And if you didn't go into those circles, you weren't in those inner circles, you just didn't get in. You know, that was part of the challenge we had. Interesting enough, when I oversaw a broadcasting management class in conjunction with the Cal State University system, when I was there, we sponsored it, and the classes were actually held at CBS. And we worked with a professor out of Cal State Los Angeles, and every year we would select 5 students from 5 different Cal State campuses: Cal State Long Beach, Dominguez, Cal State Fullerton, Cal State Los Angeles, and Cal State Northridge. And so we'd have 25 students every year, every semester, go through a television management class. So we would bring in the news director would come in one week and talk about opportunities in the newsroom, what they look for, they hire. So if you're looking to do news, this is what you need to do. One day we bring in the director of sales. If you really want a career in television and make money, this is where you need to go. You go to sales, this is your background, this is what you look for. This is where we look for in advertising executives, account execs, to go out and sell time on television. Another time we would bring in the editorial director who would come in and say, you know, I'm an editorial writer, this is what you need to do to hone your writing skills, and if you really want to write editorials, this is what we have. And then we'd actually bring in on-air talent. One year we brought in Connie Chung, another time with Brett Musburger. We bring in some of the news talent to talk about their perspective. If you're interested in being on-air talent, this is what you need to do to hone your skills and writing skills, research skills, and so forth. So it was a very competitive class to get in because only 5 from each campus, and we would rely on the local head of the departments to make referrals. And so I'd have to, every year or every semester, I'd have to go to each campus and interview 25 to 30 students, and of those 25 to 35, we'd have to select 5. And I always made sure it was a diverse class, make sure there was an array of Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans, white, male, female, gender specific. So we had a good class, and again, the classes were there. It was a very popular class to get into, and from that class, we would pick the best students and give them internship opportunities at CBS. So some of them went on to become production assistants, some of them worked in news, some of them worked on the public affairs programming side, some of them worked in sales. Particularly, we tried to gear them to the areas that they thought that they liked based on the presentations that were made. So it was a great class when we were there, and it was a credited class.
So this was for the schools of journalism, or?
This was actually for the schools of journalism and broadcast. We interviewed both. It was a combination of the two.
And this program, so you were overseeing this?
We were overseeing the program from the CBS investment side. So I was there as a facilitator along with the college professor who headed up the program out of Cal State, Los Angeles. And again, this was all done through the Cal State University system, 5 different campuses, all given credit towards their graduation. It was entitled Broadcast Management, was the name of the title of the class.
Do you remember the name of the professor?
Sue, I can't remember her last name, but I just remember Susan.
Okay. So this was, well, in CBS. So I was going to ask, so you were involved in Calib, you were the president of Calib. You were involved, you worked closely with the news department at CBS.
That's correct.
Did you have a working relationship with CCNMA?
We had a working relationship in that, you know, my department was the department responsible for purchasing tickets or sponsorship of programs. And so I made sure that CBS always was a sponsor of CCNMA for their annual big fundraising dinner that they have. They do a dinner where they raise money for scholarships for journalism students. And so I was kind of an intermediary from representing the station to CCNMA. But we had members of our broadcast staff, news team, they were members, you know, some of our journalists like Maclovio Perez and others who were regular members. I was not a member, I was just a facilitator. And so I worked very closely with CCNMA and Frank Newton, who was his executive director at the time. They knew if they wanted a financial commitment or support from the station or from CBS, that they would come to me.
Did CBS recruit at job fairs, or?
Absolutely. CBS always turned out for the job fairs and was a big participant, would sponsor, be a personal sponsor of the job fair, and we always sent recruiters to see if we could break those bright, shiny faces coming out of journalism to work at the station.
So what was the time frame of your tenure at CBS?
So I was there from 1981 to, I want to say 1986, around 1986. And my departure was the direct result of, you may recall at one time, CBS was known as the Tiffany Network. They were always the ones, they were always above everything else. We were the network of Walter Cronkite, you know, of some of his predecessors, and we were always called the Tiffany Network. And of course, there was an upstart young cowboy yahoo in Atlanta by the name of Ted Turner who just launched CNN. And of course, I remember the big push then was we're going to be 24-hour news. And of course, those of us in broadcasting, we just kind of yeah, right, 24. Who's going to watch 24-hour news, right? We couldn't believe it. And, you know, and of course, Ted started launching cable television. And of course, we didn't have cable television back then. We had regular broadcast over the airs. And so television stations were a very lucrative place to work. You can make a lot of money. I remember our folks saying, television stations were a license to print money because advertising was going to television. That's where it went. But with the advent of cable television and competition, obviously broadcast channels started to go on downturn in the economy because advertisers had other outlets, in many cases cheaper than the broadcast cost. So as a result of that, CBS started experiencing financial challenges. And so Ted Turner was looking to buy out CBS. And the last thing that the suits in New York wanted was a cowboy buying out the Tiffany network. So they brought in a white knight at the time. And he was brought in to save the company. And he ended up being a corporate raider. So when he came in, and I'm having a mental block on who that was, it'll come to me in a second. But instead of building the company, he started selling off all the assets. So the first asset we sold was CBS Records. That was part of the family when I was there. CBS at the time was the world's largest record company, and we had the biggest stars. We had the Jacksons, we had Kenny Loggins, we had Kenny Rogers, we had Dolly Parton, we had every big name celebrity as a part of that, and they sold off CBS Records. And then he sold off CBS Magazines. CBS had a whole slew of magazines that it owned. He sold off that division, and then they started cutting back on a number of positions. They were looking for the bottom line. Again, we had a corporate raider who was looking to minimize the cost. And so pink slips started going out to a number of folks in the newsroom. Pink slips started going out to management. I saw the writing on the wall. I said, it's time to leave. And right about the time, I got approached by a very good friend of mine who had just married an upcoming young politician by the name of Gloria Molina. Her husband and I were very good friends and mentioned that Gloria was getting ready to run for city council and what I consider being her press person, since my background was political press and being a press secretary. So I went to go work on her campaign for city council. She got elected. She was the first Latina elected to Los Angeles City Council, so a historical note. She asked me to stay on board as a director of communications. I didn't want to do that, so I left and went on to go do other sorts of things. And my career evolved into doing political consulting, doing some corporate PR. I came back to Gloria Molina when she ran for county supervisor. She wanted to put the team together, so I came to run her campaign, become her strategist and communications director, stayed on board, and went to go work for Hill & Knowlton, which was the largest public relations firm in the world at the time. I head up their crisis communications and media relations group on a national level, although I was based out of Los Angeles, and had major corporate and international clients. And did a one-year stint in Mexico City when I went to go live in Mexico, when they asked me to open up their office in Mexico City. So my job was to open up the office, hire staff to run the office, and once they got up and running, came back to LA to assume my positions there, and have launched into other sorts of PR departments, ran the Western region for Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, their Vice President of Corporate Communications. I did a lot of foundation work, worked at the California Endowment as their Vice President of Public Affairs and Communications. And then in 2009, decided it was time to go work for myself. So I launched Milagro with a partner, someone who just left Univision. So we launched our first company, and our first client was HealthNet, and we've taken off since then. And so my company we're still a small company, minority owned, between my partner and myself, but we have significant clients. We're a small company, yet the #1 big box retailer, Walmart, hired us to do their public affairs, their government outreach, and their media relations. Exelon Energy, the largest energy company in the world, in the country, out of Chicago, hired us to represent them in California. So we represent the largest energy company in the country. And then just recently, California Resources Corporation, which is the largest oil and gas producer in California, hired us to represent them here. So despite being a small company, we have three of the largest companies in their respective arenas who are our clients. So we represent some significant clients on that. So we're very excited about that. So we're a very successful business. But I attribute that to my political background, my time in television and journalism, and of course, doing some of the corporate work.
Okay. So taking a step back.
Let's go back to,
returning to your years at CBS.
That's correct.
So you were working at CBS while you got involved in what later became NAHJ.
That's correct. That's correct.
So how was your introduction to this work to work first to organize the big conferences,
Right.
and then for the
Right.
actual organization?
Right. So Frank Newton had put together kind of an ad hoc group at the time, made up of a number of us, and included Jay Rodriguez, Marila Salinas, myself, Henry Mendoza, Julio Moran from the LA Times was there as well too, early on, and there were discussions going on about the creation of this national entity. The black journalists had been around for quite some time. Asian journalists, national organization, had been around for quite some time, but there's no national Latino journalism group. And what the folks at Knight Ridder, they were kind of the early sponsors, had said to Frank Newton at CCMA is, you really want to increase your voice and your power to expand the number of journalists working across America in print and broadcast, you really need to have a national voice, a national organization. And in order to do that, you need to have a national organization. So we would encourage you and be willing to provide seed money to create a national organization. So Frank Newton went about starting to identify people from various regions who were engaged in some sort of journalism or broadcast, in both broadcast and print, to put this group together, which would eventually become the founding members of NHJ. And our job was to go around the country and meet with local Latino, Hispanic journalism organizations or broadcasts or print, whatever the case may be, to gauge their interest in creating a national organization, to talk about some of the mutual challenges that we all faced in our respective regions about hiring, careers, etc. And so we went about doing that with the early funding seed money presented, and Frank Newton was kind of leading that charge. And he was kind of on loan from CCMA to be able to do that. And so we traveled around the country with my colleagues to do that, to meet at the local level with these folks and to drum up interest in this national organization. So I was asked to be a member of this group because two things. One, because I was kind of in charge of a lot of the funding from CBS, so that was a natural link. But more importantly, I was the president of CALIB, the California Association of Latinos Broadcasting, so they wanted that representation on the board as well too. So there were, I think, 4 or 5 of us from this region who were on this committee. Marila Salinas representing Spanish language broadcast. I was representing English language broadcast. Jay Rodriguez was kind of representing corporate entities and NBC. And then Henry Mendoza was representing English language print. And so, we traveled, quite frankly, we traveled together. Many times we booked the same flight so we could travel together to El Paso and to San Antonio and to Houston and to Dallas and to Philadelphia and New York and Miami to meet with these local organizations, Arizona and New Mexico, to meet with these local organizations to, again, ascertain whether or not there was interest in creating this national entity, which eventually became NHJ. And so from that, then we rolled up our sleeves and really started to do the work of writing the bylaws, hiring an attorney to come in to help us write the bylaws, providing our input, membership requirements, fees and so forth, and then moving forward. But during that time, there were also these national conferences. I think the first one was in San Diego, and then we moved on to Miami and to other areas. And very early on, it was kind of a mixture of all Latinos in media, whatever you want to describe as media. So you had the journalists on one side, you had the entertainment side on the other. And so it was a big media conference, but what we found very quickly is because of the numbers, because we had both entities, the journalism side and the entertainment and everyone else side, frequently we couldn't have all of the workshops we wanted to because there were only a set amount of rooms that were available, and so they were kind of double booking. And so the journalism side, which I was involved in, very quickly determined that they needed to really break away from this kind of national media group and create their own sort of national conference. And I remember that there was a lot of anxiety and animosity over that. And the folks from the entertainment side telling us, don't leave, there's not enough of us, you're breaking up our power, we're stronger by one. And the journalism were very much determined, guys, thank you for the opportunity. We encourage you to do your own, and we're going to do our own. Doesn't mean that we don't agree on a lot of issues. We all agree we could use more Latinos in the area, but we really need to do our own workshops. We need to have that room to be able to grow and to do as many workshops as we want. We can't do that as long as we're linked together. And so there was this divorce, per se, between the entertainment, everyone else in entertainment and media, and the journalists. And so the divorce occurred. Some of the folks didn't want it to happen, but I think it was a good thing that it eventually occurred.
Taking a step back, while you were doing these meetings across the country to gauge interest, once you started going to Texas and the East Coast and other places that didn't have a lot of contact maybe with California organizations, what issues or what type of things emerged when trying to talk about going national versus local?
Well, so part of the big discussion was, does the local entity remain its separate identity? Do they become a group that's an associate member, or is the organization going to dissolve and become an NHJ chapter? That was the abrasion point, because not everyone wanted to necessarily give up their group. They didn't. I point to CCMA. CCMA had been around for a long time. Had been kind of the granddaddy or the grandfather of these organizations, and was further advanced than any other group in terms of corporate sponsoring, programs in place, job opportunities, etc. So they pretty much create this template. We kind of want to take this template and make it national, but CCMA did not want to lose its identity. They did not want to become an NHJ chapter, and that was very clear early on. And that actually created some abrasion between the two organizations. And I think the abrasion became even a little bit rougher when Frank Newton left his job as executive director of CCMA, become director of this new entity, NHJ. So that became even stronger. And there was resistance, and there were unkind things that were said, mostly coming from the CCMA side, because from the NHJ side, it was kind of, guys, come over, be part of us. You need to be part of us. Okay, you don't have to give up your identity. You become an affiliated group, with an affiliated member of NHJ. So that was kind of an issue we had to deal with at the various respective levels. Some groups were willing to give up their identity, because again, they weren't as fully developed and as strong as entrenched at CCNMA. And were willing to become an NHJ chapter. So it varied from group to group to group, but that was part of the challenge we had to deal with, whether or not the local levels would opt to become an NHJ chapter, or just keep their separate identities, become affiliated with NHJ.
So that was an issue, for example, with for people involved in both CCNMA and maybe NHJ. Did you find anything like regional differences, or when, for example, meeting with people from the East Coast, like the Northeast or Florida?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When we went to Florida, we wanted to address the tackle issues. One of the questions we had were some of the topical issues we need to, as journalists, address. And of course, Florida, it was Cuba Libre. It was, we need to go back and take over Cuba and let's kick Fidel out. And a very conservative point of view in Florida, obviously dominated by Cuban journalists, many of them who still had ties to the old country and were pretty much tied into the rank and file here, who had this dream of Cuba becoming eventually free and becoming a democratic country as opposed to a perceived dictatorship. And that was kind of a big issue for them. And so there were some challenges there. In New York, a lot of it was driven by Puerto Rican and Dominican members of journalism. And of course, statehood was the big issue with that. That was kind of an on issue. Not that we would play in it, but it was a local issue. They wanted us to address more and more and more. And so that was a big challenge. And we found some of that in Philadelphia as well, too. Again, the regional sort of differences that were there. So that was a big change. Along the border, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California didn't have really other issues were sort of cross-border issues. I think around that time, there were some preliminary discussions about creating NAFTA. There were discussions on that. So I think improving relationships with Mexico was a big issue, but it wasn't a critical issue. I can't say that there was as much emotion tied to that as there was with the Cubans and Cuba and of course with Puerto Ricans and statehood. That was always a big issue. We had that. And it was interesting because in some of the national conventions we had, you saw some acrimony between some within the Puerto Rican community of those promoting statehood versus promoting staying, Commonwealth. So we saw those debates getting hot and heavy on those local levels. When we were in Miami, we saw the debates between the Cubans the younger Cubans who were looking for outreach and opening doors to Cuba and the present government versus like, no way, we're going to come back, invade, and take over. So it was interesting to see the political arena play out even among the journalists. Some journalists, you like to say the journalists are supposed to be unbiased. That's not the case. You see very much biases in their writings and the directions and the kinds of stories they want to do. And it was very clear in Cuba that there were a lot of journalists who were the anti-Fidel group who espoused that, and very publicly did that. And that was kind of always a challenge. And then, of course, the other national challenge we saw was English language versus, Spanish language. That was kind of I don't want to say it was a breaking point, but it was, why doesn't Spanish language get the same amount of respect as English language? We have just as big an audience, if not more important, and we're doing that. And so the other entity I think that they were trying to call, I heard particularly from my Spanish language counterparts in print media, was creating this guideline or rule of ethics in journalism, more prevalent in the Spanish language than in English language, because English language pretty much had kind of this journalism ethics. It was taught in many classes, and there were sort of rules of the road that you had to adhere to as a journalist. Not so much in Spanish language media. They weren't as strict in terms of looking at ethics and journalism as they were. And that was a common theme that we heard from our Spanish language counterparts.
Okay. And another issue I wanted to ask about, people in the founding committee, most were journalists, working journalists, but there were people with other backgrounds, like communication, public communication, or the corporate world.
Right.
So how did that work? Yeah.
Well, that was interesting because remember, this was an ad hoc committee that was put together without NHA being founded yet. And so when it got down to membership, the discussion of what qualifications it's going to take to become a full-fledged member of NHJ, the subject came up and how to address that. And so in my arena, I was not a full-time working journalist. I did meet, though, on a daily basis with the newsroom, was part of the news team in terms of providing community input and insight into news and how they develop their stories for the day. Was also writing editorials for the station, so consequently, that kind of gave me a buy. So I wasn't totally disassociated from the journalism or the news side, and so I think they saw that as an opportunity to grandfather someone with my background into NHJ. Then you had folks like Ethan Oslander, who had a journalism background but wasn't a practicing journalist, but was a professor at, I want to say ASU, University, I can't remember if it was ASU or one of the Arizona universities, and had a very credible program, but they saw her as a valuable asset, and they sort of grandfathered her in as well, too, as I recall. Then you have people like Jay Rodriguez, who was not in the news side, but was on the corporate side, was their senior vice president of corporate communications for NBC National, was probably the granddaddy of all of us and probably the highest ranking Latino in broadcast television at the time. They saw him as an asset, had great ideas, and so they wanted to extend to him a membership as well too. And I think Jay may have taken that membership on. So we were kind of dealing with those folks who didn't really set the standard for what we would think as a 100% working journalist, and yet were able to do that. I wonder what happens today and how they're dealing with it. I think they've expanded their membership because now you have all these citizen journalists, people who are bloggers. I mean, are they considered, news people? Do they have a full membership ride with NHJ now? They have the blog, they're kind of creating news, they have their own websites, they're reporting, so maybe they don't work for an NBC, CBS, or Turner or some other organization, but maybe they are citizen journalists. So, everything has changed today than it was back then. Back then it was a little bit easier in terms of determining who are the working journalists and who are not, And by virtue of the fact, I mean, could you be a technical person? Could you be a director of a news operation and still be a member of NHJ? Because technically you weren't a news director, but you were part of the news team, and I don't remember how we dealt with that. I don't remember we ever addressed that issue.
So this, for example,
And if I could just say, so the other question is a weatherman a journalist? You know, we had weathermen. I mean, they were looking to have some of my friend, Chloe Pettis, can you join NHJ? Because I don't know, are you technically a journalist or are you a weatherman? I mean, you know, so those are questions that were being addressed back then. Go ahead.
So did, for example, this was how it worked for you, for Ms. Auslander, for Jay Rodriguez, people who were in the funding committee. So did this become then? Was this reflected in the bylaws later? This openness or this flexibility when defining who's a journalist?
You know, I think, as I recall, when the discussions were, okay, with me, as I recall, it was, okay, what percentage of time are you devoting to the newsroom versus your full job? And I don't know that that made it into the bylaws. I can't remember how the bylaws were written. I do know that I was grandfathered in along with Edith and some of the founding members to join in. I have to go back and look at what the early bylaws said in terms of membership. I can't recall.
One, kind of going back to this, to the geographical differences or regional differences. At one point, there was also the decision of where to place the headquarters. Do you recall that discussion?
I do.
How did that go? What was your position?
So there were discussions, should it be in Los Angeles? And of course, CCMA said, hell no, not in my backyard. You need to go somewhere else. Other people were saying, well, New York, because New York is kind of the media capital in terms of, you know, corporate entities. That's where the corporate headquarters are of, you know, the big broadcast networks and, you know, and the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and major entities. Some people said, well, you got to be in Washington because that's the national capital. The argument against that, well, yeah, but there's no major national media corporation headquarters in why Washington, D.C.? So that was kind of going back and forth. So I think the main discussion is whether or not it should be L.A. L.A. because of all the media entities we have here, all the broadcasts. I mean, this is the media capital of the world, you know, whether it's broadcast, print, or so forth back then. New York because all the corporate headquarters, and of course Washington because that's where national policy is generated. So that was a discussion that was going back and forth. So I think where they, as I recall, they kind of fell on was Washington, D.C.
What did you think was the best choice?
I actually thought Washington, D.C. might be the best choice, you know, just because, you know, you had so many media outlets that had Washington, D.C. bureaus. I think we needed to be, because we really want to elevate our voice when it came to national policy and weigh in on that. I think because national policy comes out of D.C., we want to be there. There were opportunities to associate with national Latino policymakers, members of Congress, at the time, you know, who had influence with the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, and other sort of outlets. And so we wanted that opportunity to be able to intersect journalism with politics. I think that, and if that's what the goal is, because so much policy affects how we work in the newsroom, whether it's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that says you need to hire more minorities, or the FCC that gives out licenses to broadcast entities. You want to start a station, okay, but you have to hire X amount of minorities. Of course, this was back then. Things have changed now, but back then there was teeth to the FCC and the EEOC in terms of making demands that if you're going to use the public airwaves, if you're going to service the community, that you do have to reflect the diversity of the community in which you're serving. Or in some cases, you have to have sort of percentage minority ownership. So I think we wanted to have that voice in that, to make sure that that was a very strong glove that those governments could have that would affect the hiring of Latinos in media. And that was, I think, a strong factor for me into wanting to be in Washington, D.C.
Changing gears a little bit. So this whole process required a lot of time and travel.
It did.
So how supportive was CBS of you taking time for this?
They're very supportive, very supportive, and I had the support from my boss, Jamie Bennett, at the local level. We were at the stations level, and the support from corporate. They saw the positive nature of creating a national entity, a voice. So consequently, my involvement and the involvement of the company meant, sponsorship. And so for the conferences, you could always count CBS as being a major contributor to the conference to make sure that, there weren't any bills at the end of the conference, that NHA had to worry about. So I can't say we weren't the only sponsor. We were the only sponsor. We were one of the major sponsors. So it was NBC because of Jay Rodriguez, and CBS because of myself and other folks who supported me at the company at the time. And of course, other entities came in. The Los Angeles Times was kind of a major sponsor as well too, some of the other folks. But CBS was very much a sponsor, and I know that we would sponsor one of the luncheons. It would be sponsored by CBS, and so we would create some sort of keynote speaker, whoever that might be. And I remember one luncheon. I can't remember if it was the one in Miami. I was up on the dais because I was representing CBS. It was a CBS event, so I was on the board and also representing the company. But next to me was Teresa Rodriguez from Univision. And I had always wanted to recruit her to come to CBS, and so I used that as an opportunity to put in a word. Would you ever be interested in English language? She's very eloquent in Spanish and English. I said, hadn't thought about it, but maybe think about it. So I remember getting our recruits over to her as a result of that luncheon conversation we had. And she did have a short stint at CBS. I don't know if you remember, but she left Univision to go to CBS for a short period of time. And I think she may have been a weekend anchor for a short period of time, as I recall, or substitute for a weekend anchor. But she spent a short time at CBS and then went back to Univision. That was her home. That's where she was comfortable. So it created a great recruiting opportunity for us. And so at the conferences, typically you would see CBS recruitment folks there at the conferences, meeting with some of the folks, checking resumes out, participating in the workshops. The company was all in. And so I'm very proud to say that my company was all in when NHA was created and continued to be a major sponsor for a number of years.
Did you become a board member or an officer at any point?
I did not, because right about the time where the organization was starting to gel is when I left. And then I no longer had 10% of my time in the newsroom. I went back to the political side, and so I was not a full-time member on the board, didn't have the activity. I was just a founding member. Yeah.
Okay, and there was also, so you were no longer at CBS, so there was not that...
Yeah, there was not that connection that they could be there, and they didn't have associate members, so I couldn't join, so they went on.
Did you maintain any constant contact? Did you attend the conferences, or were...
For I attended a couple of conferences on behalf of my corporations. I sold some of the companies that I was on, that it'd be a good idea for us to be there, because after all, there's all these journalists in the same room. I mean, I told you a story about Mexico and how they left us outside with all the journalists, and we were able to sell the story on the speaker, Antonio Villaraigosa. So I convinced my company that we really need to be at the conferences, because there was an opportunity to meet with some of the journalists, pitch them on some of the ideas that we had, some of the stories, some of our clients. And so I continued to promote that for a while, and then kind of went by the wayside. And I think probably went by the wayside when NHA started experiencing some membership loss and some budget challenges. I do remember that there was a time when I was at Anthem, and I had a lot of money to contribute, and I was trying to contribute to NHJ. And what I wanted to do was to sponsor, because we were a health insurance company. I wanted to sponsor a workshop that dealt with health education, and particularly for those reporters who are covering health, particularly health issues impacting the Latino community. And so I was trying to give NHA money, but I could never get them to respond to me. I think I had something like $35,000 I wanted to give them, and no one ever responded to me. And I said, guys, you can't do that. I've got all this money here. All I want is, for you guys to do a workshop on health issues impacting the Latino community and how journalists could cover that better. You know, I mean, what's better than that? I couldn't get a response, and I think NHA at that time was probably in disarray in terms of its leadership. I think they went through a couple of executive directors. They had some fundraising challenges. I think membership was dropping in, and I just kind of heard this from the outside. As an outsider, not really tied to it so much, and there being in DC, I did see that there were, and I had heard through some of the members that there were some membership challenges with NHA at the time. So.
Just to get a sense of the timeline, when were you at Anthem?
So I was Anthem, let's see, I was there from 2000, about 2004 to 2007.
Okay. Now that later you went to work with Gloria Molina and working in campaigning and as a press director. Being back on the other side of the process, of
right,
working with journalists, do you how was the mainstream media? I'm trying. Let me try to rephrase the question.
Okay.
But what was the performance of the mainstream media, the English language press, in covering, for example, Latina candidates and politicians?
Well, I can tell you for Gloria Molina specific, it was national news because it was a historical note. She was going to be the first woman ever elected to the County Board of Supervisors and the first Latina. And there's a point of differentiation because there was actually a woman who was on the Board of Supervisors for a very short period of time that was appointed by the governor. And she was appointed because there was an empty seat. But when it came time to elect that person, when the election came up for that position, she was voted out. So she was never elected to that position. So Gloria was the first woman elected to the County Board of Supervisors and the first Latina. And of course, that made national coverage. Gosh, I just remember everyone from Dan Rather to Cokie Roberts coming in to want to interview her and setting that up. And I was kind of I was the gatekeeper of all these. I remember when we did the day after the election, and then we walked in, we had a press conference to talk about the day after the election and the victory. There must have been 25 to 30 television cameras in this big room. I mean, it was like a White House press thing, and we had just about every entity, Spanish language. We had reporters from Mexico had come up. I mean, it was a major story for her of historical note to have this little Latina be the first person in the County Board of Supervisors, which a lot of people don't understand what they do, but they are probably the second best job in California from the governor. If you're not governor, you want to be a County Board of Supervisors. You have a large budget, a large staff, and a lot of people that you oversee, over 1 million constituents, 1.5 million constituents that you oversee. So it's a pretty powerful job. And for the most part, at the time, there were no term limits. So they said that was kind of a job for life. You know, you want to be a County Board of Supervisor because of all the perks that came along with it. And so it was a historical note. And I remember as a result of that, she was asked to be on the committee for Bill Clinton, and kind of the election committee co-chair, and a lot of notoriety that came from that. So it was a good place for me to be from press-wise because I was a gatekeeper. And what I appreciated about Gloria was she allowed me to be her spokesperson. So many times she would come in and say, okay, what did I say to the media? And it was my quote I would attribute to her, or I would speak, and she just wanted to know what I had said. So she gave me the freedom, and she had the trust in me that I wouldn't put my foot in my mouth, and that whatever quote I would have would be something that she would say or agree to. So that was kind of on the, and it was actually because of that national exposure that I was recruited by Hill and Knowlton. They decided we need someone like this, and so that allowed me the opportunity to go back into the private sector and worked in an international public relations firm that had international clients. So.
Okay, since you started your career, how has the visibility of Latinas and Latinos in the media changed?
Well, it's been up and down. There was a time, again, I talk about where we were wanting to relocate to or locate to Washington, D.C., NHJ. when you had government entities like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and you had the FCC, they had teeth in terms of their demands and requirements for either mergers or the issuance of broadcast licenses, where there was teeth. They could mandate that these entities had to reflect diversity in the community, so they had to hire Latinos, Latinas, African Americans, Asian Americans, etc. Now we've gone to sexual preference. I mean, it's expanded all of the requirements on that, but those entities don't have as big a teeth as they did back then. So you don't have the kind of the iron glove that says you must do this so much anymore. They kind of like insinuate it, but they don't have the teeth that they did back then because of the government deregulation. So I've seen an ebb and flow. There was a time where every station in Los Angeles had to have their Latina anchor woman. So they each had their Latina. And then there was a time where they had to have their Asian anchor woman. So everyone had their Connie Chung or their Connie Chung clones along, that kind of area. And then I'd say most noticeably, I've seen kind of a drop in the number of faces in broadcasts that look like me, or have a Latino or Latina name, Latino name. I've seen less and less in the print side, but I think that's more a sign of the economic times as print journalism is struggling to stay alive. And you see huge cutbacks in the newsroom, so you see less of the Juan Gonzalez's and the Henry Mendozas and the Julio Moran's of the world who've gone on to do work on the private side, doing other sorts of things, or the Normo Sosa, who you mentioned, who's now working with the government side. So those opportunities don't exist anymore. So I'd have to say we've taken some steps backwards. Part of it is just the economic realities of print media and the unavailability of jobs out there. On the broadcast side, I'd say, there are cable outlets that have hired Latinas, and so you don't necessarily see them on the main, what we call the O&Os, the owned and operated stations, necessarily anymore. I know that in the last couple of years there was kind of a bloodletting at the local NBC station, and so a lot of the Latino activists were concerned that many of the Latinos were being let go. I don't know if it's just a transition or a matter of the economic realities or why that was, but I don't see as many people who look like me on television anymore like we saw when I was at CBS, when I think people are more attuned to diversity. I've been to a couple of the journalism conferences. I've been to some of the job opportunity conferences, and again, a lot of young people are coming in out of those schools, but I don't know necessarily that there's additional outlets, and part of that could be because there's so many more job opportunities in cable or off channels, that aren't necessarily startups. There's a lot of internet sites now that people are working in. So there's so many opportunities for people to work in this area that are not necessarily what we would say as your traditional route, an O&O station or affiliated station or a print media. So people have their own blogs now, or they have their own news chats, or I know many private foundations are kind of creating journalism entities, and so you have a lot of former journalists that are working there. I mean, I know in my business there are a lot of former LA Times editors who got laid off who are now doing what I do. We call it going to the dark side, doing public relations. Oh, so welcome to the dark side. It's interesting to note that in my past working on the dark side, that I've had a fairly good relationship with journalists, but from time to time there's some journalists who don't like dealing with us because they see us as paid mouthpieces or PR people, and they don't like dealing with us, and we become adversaries in a way. But now I see them that they left their jobs and they're now doing what I'm doing, and so I laugh because I've actually ran across one of those at the LA Times working with my client, and they got hired by my client. So I walked up to him and said, "So welcome to the dark side. You get to do what I do. You get to tell you can't talk to this person." So he kind of was a little bit humbled from where he was, and so and again, that's an economic reality of the LA Times not selling as many newspapers as they used to, and so having major cutbacks, and unfortunately many of those are Latinos.
Kind of on a related note, on the field of PR and communications. What's the status of diversity? How important it is for that field right now? How has it changed?
I've seen increased opportunities in the field of public relations and communications, for Latinos, particularly with the surge in Latino population, and you have, in my world, you have two kinds of entities. You have the major companies like the Hill and Knowltons of the world, who are major corporations, but do want to service this community because they see a need for it. So they have a Latino division within the corporate structure. Then you have folks like me who have worked in that world, who decided that they wanted to become entrepreneurs and launch their own company like we did in 2009 and create their own entity. And we actually market ourselves as a strategic communications firm, Milagro Strategy Group. We are not, quote, a Latino firm, despite the fact that we're Latino owners, myself and my partner, and the fact that that's a strong strength and a practice that we have. So we do Latino outreach, but that's not all we do. We do crisis communications, we do strategic counsel, we do community affairs. So when we got hired by Walmart, we weren't hired because we're necessarily a Latino firm. That was a big plus for us because we had the Latino outreach, but we were hired because of our outreach capabilities, and we had a strong Latino influence. We do for Southern California, we do all of Walmart's PR. It's not just Latino PR. We're ABC, CBS. I mean, they know that Milagro Strategy Group, if you want a story about Walmart or go to Walmart for a statement, they come to us here. All the media outlets know that. For California Resources Corporation, the largest producer of oil and gas in California, they didn't hire us because we were Latino focused. They knew that we have the Latino strength, but that was one of our core competencies. But we also do government affairs, issues management, crisis communications, and that's why they hired us. When we got hired by Exelon, the largest energy company in the country, based out of Chicago, to represent them in California, it wasn't because we were Latino. They didn't even see the brown face. They wanted someone who could handle issues management, crisis communications, and general media relations. And so we actually went up against some of the larger firms, I found out later, who our competition was, and we made the finals. And when I was told who we were up against, I'm going, oh my God, we're up against an international PR firm. We won the business. But that's because of our core competencies and our abilities and our community contacts, our political contacts, which we've developed over the years. So if you were to look for Latino PR, you wouldn't find Milagro Strategy Group. If you were to look for general PR, you would find us, but most people know that one of our core competencies is Latino outreach, and that's a big plus. So when they hire us, they also hire us because of that ability. So I think that those companies who have that ability to kind of work in both worlds do well. There are some of my colleagues who are in the business who have their own companies that all they want to do is Latino PR, and God bless them, good for them. And they represent a lot of companies, corporate entities, whose sole function is Latino outreach and market development in that area. So we made a conscientious decision just to have that as a core competency, but not to make it as our single focus.
Just very quick question: where does the name Milagro come from?
So I'm so glad you asked that story, because it is a funny story, and you'll see what I mean. So we launched in 2009. If you remember, that was right around the time we had the first market crash, when things were going down and people were losing, their investments and retirement funds and IRAs, and gosh, people were in a tailspin. I mean, companies were going out of business, and we actually decided to partner up in 2009, right about the time when NALEO, the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, had their national conference here in LA, in Hollywood. So we went there because we know there's a lot of corporations that sponsor it, and we want to meet some of the folks. And we know that the folks who go there are people who have money to hire PR agencies and do government relations. So we wanted to go out there. And we didn't really have a name. We just knew we were going to create this entity. So we're telling everybody, hey, my partner and I are creating this national entity. We're launching a PR company. Well, what are you calling it? We don't have a name yet, but we're figuring it out. almost across the board, we were told by those people in corporations, don't do it. This is not the time to go into business. This is a very poor time. The markets are down. We're laying off PR people. We're firing our PR agencies. We don't have them. We have to cut back. The market has crashed. So after hearing that so many times at the conference and being a little discouraged, I turned to my partner and said, if we pull this shit off, this is going to be, a miracle. And right away, wait, milagro, that's it, milagro. So the second part of that story is I called my attorney right away to say, can you check and see if this name is taken? Is it copyrighted? Can we get it? Well, what do you want to call it? We want to call it, at that time, Milagro Communications Group. So he called me the very next day, said, got good news and bad news. Okay, what's the bad news? Let me have that first. The name's already taken. Shit. What's the good news? They didn't renew the name. Do you want to grab it? It'll cost $500. Says, please grab it, take it. So we grabbed it. So someone already had the name, but they hadn't renewed it with the state, so the name was up for grabs. We grabbed it and became Milagro Communications Group. So that night, we were at the dinner and we were at the table with Congressman Javier Becerra, Congressman Joe Baca, and some other electeds. And we were telling them about the launch of the company, and they're asking us where we were going to call it. And we said, well, we're thinking of calling Milagro. Right about that point, my business partner, who just left Univision, they just had a party for her going away party, and someone gave her a gift. And the gift they gave her was a business card holder that was specially engraved. And on the business card holder, it said, expect miracles. So that was just the perfect culmination to, we chose the right name. And so it's a name that stuck. So people call us Milagro. They'll short, and they'll say, it's Milagro, it's Milagro, it's Milagro. And we just tell them, yeah, we make miracles happen. So that's how the name came about. It was because if we could have pulled it off, if we were going to pull it off, it was going to be a miracle in light of the market crash. The fact that somehow or another the name was available and we were able to grab it, and the fact that she had this business card holder that said expect miracles, it was just the perfect union, and it's been the perfect name for us. We've been very happy with it. We actually folded Milagro Communications Group a few years ago and launched this rebrand ourselves Milagro Strategy Group. We had a third partner. We parted ways, and so we decided that my core partner and I from Univision would continue to operate in a Milagro Strategy Group. So that's where we launched, and so we continue today being very successful at what we do.
Well, that's a great story. Kind of, as we prepare to wrap up the interview.
Sure.
I'm going back all the way to the beginning.
Okay.
So you were politically conscious since very young.
Absolutely.
Did you pay special attention to the news back then? Were you?
Oh, always did, because particularly around political campaigns, what kind of stories are run, what's being said, what crises we're dealing with, what they're saying about our folks, who got in trouble. Always pay particular attention to the news. I had my favorite news back home. My favorite channel was KIII in Corpus. It was the ABC affiliate. That was the one station that was there. And I tell you, one of the reasons I gravitated to KIII is because they tended to reflect the community. They tended to have a Latina anchor. And in addition to that, back then, they had a Sunday variety show that was live. That was called the Domingo Peña Show. And this is kind of a local variety show where anybody who had anything to say could come on. You were promoting a barbecue to raise money to do this, the local Little League, or they would schedule talent. If you had a band or conjunto, you could go on and play. And it would last from like 9 o'clock in the morning until noon. It was a 3-hour show. And Domingo Peña was the local celebrity, so that aired on that station. So that was the Latino station. So if we wanted to announce a political campaign, we'd go there and announce it. If we wanted to announce that we're doing a fundraiser to raise money for the local Little League or Boy Scout and Girl Scouts, that's where we went. Or we would just want to be entertained. I even had a rock group at the time, and I was in high school, and we actually went on there, and we're on live television, so it was an opportunity. And of course, we had a lot of the Tex-Mex stars going on. Selena would go on there when she was very young. Johnny Canales, eventually Domingo Peña died and became the Johnny Canales Show, and you got to take it away. And that was kind of a big gathering point for many Latinos. So So my favorite station growing up was the ABC affiliate KIII. So the news was very important to us. That was, what were the local politicians doing these days? What scandal was going on? That was always I was always intrigued by that. And politics was always in my blood.
And do you think the local media in Corpus Christi, um, including KIII, do you think they were thorough and fair in their coverage of Latinos, Mexican Americans?
It depends on who you ask. There was always that element. My parents were sort of out of that school that if there was a negative story, they're always trying to keep the Latinos down. It's, why do they do that story? It's on purpose. They want to make us look bad. I thought they were particularly balanced, but that was my perspective. But then I would see from time to time where there were negative stories covered. And I think that the mindset that my parents had was just because they'd been through so much discrimination and racial. And I even experienced discrimination growing up as a kid. I remember it was not a good feeling. I remember being called Mexican sometimes. I remember there was one time where Little League, of all places, you would think, all-American, work at the beating discrimination. But I remember that my dad always wanted me to play baseball because he was a softball fanatic. He was a pitcher, underhand fast pitch. He was not the slow pitch. These are the fast pitch guys. My dad is actually in the Hall of Fame of the National Museum for Softball in Norman, Oklahoma. And everyone knew him as one of the premier pitchers nationally in softball, fast pitch. So he wanted me a ball player. And I go, okay, Dad, I'll be a ball player. So I tried out for Little League, and my dad wanted to become a coach. And there was a team there that was called the Braves. They were kind of like the Bad News Bears. They were like all the rejects nobody wanted. So no one wanted to coach this team. So my dad wanted to coach it. So he took this team that nobody wanted, and he started to build up the team. So of course he drafted me because I was his son, and of course he wanted me a pitcher, so I was a pitcher, and then we had an array of folks. We had Latinos, we had blacks, we had whites. The common thing we had is his two assistant coaches were also Latino who were played on his team. So we had 3 Latino coaches. And this was a little league that was predominantly Anglo, and because of its location, and all the coaches were white. And I remember we started winning, and we started winning, and we started winning, and we got better and better and better. And we would have people who would harass us because of who we were. I mean, we would have parents from the other side come to the side of our field and would say, hey, Mexican, why can't, it was that kind of stuff, the harassment. And I remember during the championship game, we were playing the Yankees, and they were the big game, the big team. And I remember that I was on first base, and my dad gave me the signal to steal second base, and I stole. He gave me the signal, and I ran. And I remember the umpire telling me to go back. And I said, why are you going back? You left too soon. You need to go back. And so I went back to first base, and then my father called timeout, and he goes out, and he says, why did you go back? I said, well, because he told me to. And then he looked at the umpire, and he said, why did you tell my son to go back? He goes, I didn't tell you to go back. And I looked at him like, what? I asked you twice. You told me to go back. He said, I didn't tell you to go back. And so my dad says, well, my son says you didn't. Look, you give me a hard time, you're out of, they just kicked him out of the game like that. They didn't, it was all planned. They just wanted to get rid of him. And so my dad had to go out and sit in the audience with them. And I remember white parents from the other side, other team, because they were predominantly white, coming around, hey, Mexican, can't you control your temper? What, you have too much beers? I mean, and I'm hearing this as a kid. And I remember I was so angry, and I was crying, and I remember wanting to hit the next player, and I was throwing wild pitches, and the assistant coach just said, calm down, calm down, calm down. And I just wanted revenge. I wanted to hit the next white kid because of what happened. So eventually they had to pull me out because I was so emotional I couldn't pitch anymore. But I just remember that was tough.
So those type of experiences must have left a mark, and yeah. And this was in Corpus Christi.
Oh, yeah.
We had a big Latino population.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, what neighborhood or what part of Corpus Christi did you grow up in?
It was on the west side. It was went to Roy Miller High School, again, Evelyn Goria's high school. West side, it was, as a matter of fact, another story. So when we were a very young family, my parents lived in my grandmother's house. We had a room. When we finally bought our first house, we moved into this neighborhood on the west side. We were the first Latino family to move in. There was a petition going around to prevent us from moving into the neighborhood. And it was a very kind Anglo woman who lived across the street, grandmotherly type, who came and told us, I don't know if you know this, but there's a petition going around to keep you from moving in. Now, they couldn't do that legally, but they were looking to try to influence the real estate, the broker who was selling them, to not have us move in. So we learned very quickly that they did not want us in that neighborhood. Well, we moved in anyway, and we eventually became friends. And it was funny because my friends growing up were the rednecks right across the way. And I'll share you, this I have to share, it's a funny story. It was funny then, it's funny now. So growing up, because my first language is English, and I did, although I remember those discriminations, I didn't really realize I was Latino. This was before the baseball, before those incidents started to occur, that I started to realize, oh, I must be different. But I remember as a little kid, maybe all of 7 years old, the big outing for us was going to the drive-in movies on Friday nights or Saturday nights with the family. And I remember The Alamo came out, the movie The Alamo with John Wayne, the original one. And of course, that was a big movie. It's the famous celebrities, right? So I remember we went to the drive-in, and we went with our neighbors who were, I can probably describe them now as hillbilly rednecks. But we got along. We got along great. If they had any racial tendencies, they didn't really show them to us, but we played well. So I remember going to the movie theater and sitting there, and we're in the cars, and they're next to us, and we've got speakers. And there's a scene where the Mexican troops are coming in from Santa Ana, and they're lining up, and there's all these beautiful uniforms, and the trumpets are sounding. And I remember rolling down the window and yelling to my friends across the way, "Hey, these Mexicans didn't have to dress up for this battle." I didn't know. And I remember my parents going, "Shh, shh, shh." I didn't know at the time. This was before the baseball experience. This is before that I started to really, again, I was all of 7 years old. I didn't really realize that I was different in color, other than I had dark hair. And because I was English speaking and my parents were always into education, I was always in the accelerated classes. And it was interesting because in the accelerated classes, it was all the white kids and 2 Latinos, myself and my best friend, Oscar del Bosque. We're the 2 kids, of a class of maybe 30, and there was only 2 Latinos in this class, yet there was a lot of Latinos in this neighborhood. So they tended to put them in the secondary classes or the third classes, because some of them were Spanish dominant. Some of them because they had maybe an accent, I don't know. Maybe because their parents didn't promote education, but my parents were always education, education, education. That was always picked. So I never saw myself as being different than anybody else, and it wasn't until, I have to say, the baseball situation that really opened my eyes, and I was all of, maybe 11, 12 years old at the time, that I started to realize that there were differences, and then went on to junior high, and then went on to high school, and started seeing where things were different on the world, and listening to my parents tell us the stories about discrimination that existed early on. So all of that made me who I am today in terms of my views on the world and where we are today in terms of politics and gender and racial politics. So that was an input, and I have to believe that that's what encouraged me to move out of Texas, to go to expand my horizons, to influence. And so many of us from South Texas moved away from Texas. There was a big recruitment drive when I was in high school to go to the Ivy League schools. So there were a lot of Texans to Harvard and Princeton and Yale, and so many of them who went there. I chose to stay in Texas for various reasons. And then I remember going into meeting with folks going around the country representing various corporations and talking to young college students, and what do I have to do to make it in the corporate world? Well, you have to move. You have to leave. You leave I don't want to leave my family. I said, well, if you're going to make it in the corporate world, you have to be mobile. That was a common theme I heard from so many Latino students, and it discouraged me because they weren't willing to get up and leave to do that. And, you know, because of family ties, and I certainly understood that, but I kind of came back and said, hey, I left, when I moved to California, I didn't know anybody. I really didn't. Yet I was supposed to be in charge of PR, public relations. And I'm the new guy in town. Well, it's interesting because when I first got here, one of the folks who took me under his wing was a former Texan from Brownsville, Texas, who was working for Congressman Roybal. And it was 1978, it's political reason. So they took me around to all the political events, and I got to know politicians and influentials and business leaders. So I didn't stay the guy from Texas very long. I became very much entrenched in local California politics and the economy and the business world and the social world. And after a while, people thought I was from California. But you know, I think the one thing they gave away is, back then I used to wear a lot of cowboy boots, and I'd wear my cowboy boots with my suits, and they, oh, you must be from Texas. So, I mean, to this day, not every day, but I still wear cowboy boots with my suits from time to time. So that's still, people look at me and say, where are your boots? We're looking for your boots. So I still keep that Tejano identity. That's something that'll never die. And, you know, hopefully one of these days I can convince my wife to go retire in Texas. I don't know if that'll happen. If not, it'll have to be a ranch somewhere in California with horses. So.
And actually, now that you mentioned, you know, your first years here in California, you studied psychology, right? So why did you go into communications? How did that happen?
That was actually because of it was an interesting segue, because of my work in politics. Because in politics, it is about communications. It's about communicating with voters about what you can do. And, you know, it's funny because when I went to work for Miller Brewing Company, I mean, I had the ability to write, because working in the governor's office and being a volunteer for various campaigns, I wrote press releases. But I didn't know how to write in the corporate style. There's a different corporate style from the political style. So I had to kind of relearn how to write in the corporate style when I went to go work for Miller Brewing Company. So I had to go to Milwaukee to learn to write the corporate way of writing press releases. You know, because there's a certain way, there's certain requirements that the SEC has in terms of, if you're a publicly traded company, there's certain language you need to include that. So I had to kind of relearn all of that. But there's the one common theme that I found in all whether it was politics or the corporate world or even the media world, was the ability to write and to write well. And that's one thing I say to all the students coming out: please learn to write and write well, because if you can do that, you can get a job anywhere. You know, I know in talking to many of my friends who are lawyers, they say that the best law students come out of English classes. Their English majors are the best law students, not the ones who are pre-law. It's the folks, and the professor will tell you the best students are the ones who are English majors, you know, because they know how to write and write well. And as a lawyer, that's one of the skill set you have to have, you know. So therein it was the ability to write. And then of course, to have a kind of a political lay of the land, understand politics and what's going on behind the scenes, what's really the story. And you learn that only through being in politics and political campaigns. You learn to judge people, you learn to know what people's motives really are, and you bring that into the corporate world. I mean, one of the reasons that we get hired for companies like Walmart and CRC is because we have that political insight. We know what the political moves are, because all these corporations are regulated by public policy, and public policy is driven by public opinion. And so part of our charge is, how do we affect that public opinion to sway them to affect public policy that's going to create policy that's in the best interest of our clients? Business laws, regulatory laws. I mean, how do we do that? How do you build support to do that? I mean, part of our job with Walmart was to go into communities where they want to build stores and build community support. Now, more so here in California and Texas, because you know, you have Walmarts everywhere in Texas, right? Here in California, it's a little difficult because unions are so entrenched in California, and unions are basically anti-Walmart, because Walmart doesn't have unions. They've always wanted to unionize the employees, but they've never been successful in doing that. So because there's so much union support, we have to go into communities where there may be a lot of unions or union families or union support, or politicians who are beholden to unions, that we have to counter that by building so much community support that they march on City Hall and demand their Walmart because they want a Walmart. You know, you will never see another Walmart built in the city of Los Angeles, because the city a long time ago passed an ordinance, they call it the anti-big box ordinance, that's written in such a way that it excludes Walmarts from being built in the city. There's so many regulatory rules and environmental requirements that a Walmart would have to pass in order to get there that it's not worth the time and effort. And even then, the city council would have to approve it, and majority of the council, every member of the city council, which there are I think 15, with the exception of one, is a Democratic holder, and they're all beholden to unions. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, that's just the reality. And if they want to stay in office, they better have union support. So unions don't want a Walmart, they're not going to vote for a Walmart, so that'll never happen. But that was our charge, to build that community support to get those Walmarts built. But it's through that political intuitiveness, knowing connecting the dots in politics, understanding how to communicate folks to get them to support your client. All of those are melded together, and so it's been a great training ground for me. I mean, people who want to get in politics, the first thing I tell them is work on a political campaign. Be a sticker and licker. Not so much anymore, but just go in there and volunteer in the campaign. Be the delivery guy. Bring coffee. Work on the campaign. Make those phone calls. Go door to door. Knock on the door for your elected official. That's where you learn all about politics. That's where you start. And that's how you work your way up. You don't come in being a strategist. You learn from the bottom up.
So in your case, you did all of that.
I did all that
while
very young,
supporting the Raza Unida party.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, the Democratic Party and Raza Unida, and then back to the Democratic Party.
All right. Okay. One thing before actually moving on to the last question, because it kind of went back to the origin.
Sure.
So Raza Unida party was linked to the Chicano movement and activism in Texas. Mm-hmm. And when you were young, there were some, at the schools there were activist groups. There was, you mentioned Mazo. Mm-hmm. Did you, in addition or beside your work with Raza Unida party, did you ever become involved or did you interact with people who were activists?
Yeah, mostly people in the Raza Unida Party, and there were two youth organizations at the time. There was Mazo and Mayo, Mexican American Student Organization and Mexican American Youth Organization. They were kind of active on there. Then you had kind of the Brown Berets, a variation of Brown Berets. They were primarily here in Los Angeles, but they had kind of chapters in Texas. They were trying to mimic, the Brown Berets here in Los Angeles. And there was we worked on the campaign. I worked on the Raza Unida campaign. I was making phone calls, and I was going door to door, and I was promoting Ramsey Muniz and taking Ramsey around, introducing people. I was going to the fundraisers, helping barbecue the chicken to raise money for the political events, and so we were very active in that area. So we had opportunities to cross paths with Willie Velasquez, who was the founder of Southwest Voter Registration and their project, and was very much connected to the Raza Unida back then. He was kind of a creation of that. Jose Angel Gutierrez, had an opportunity to meet with him. But I was also interfacing with a lot of the old guard, advocates and folks, Dr. Hector Garcia from the GI Forum, and the Bonillas from LULAC, and Tony Bonilla was my attorney back in Corpus Christi, and he was a former national president. I mean, all the Bonillas have had an opportunity to be national president of LULAC, so that was an opportunity that I had to interface with all those folks, so that my view on life was pretty much created as a result of my interface with all those folks, where there was the old school advocates or the new Raza Unida advocates, and whatever came out of that.
So you worked with and interacted with people.
Absolutely.
The old school.
Old school and new school, yeah, at the time. It's all old school now, but back then. So obviously with Raza Unida, it was a younger element, because some folks labeled us as communists because we were this third party, and we were kind of a socialist movement. We were defined. We really weren't, but people labeled us that way. My parents tried to talk me out of being Raza Unida because they saw it as kind of a socialist movement. They were kind of conservative Democrats, and they were so glad when I came back to the party. It's the party did its thing. It lasted for maybe 4 or 5 years, and then kind of went on its own and kind of disintegrated. You had some infighting, and people kind of went their way. The Crystal City folks kind of went by the wayside as well too. So, but it started a movement, that kind of created that that movement within the universities where you started having these young advocates and activists and militants coming out of those schools eventually. And I have to kind of point the finger at St. Mary's University because that seemed to be the place, that Jesuit school where a lot of those folks came out of, those activists came out of St. Mary's University. That was, I think, a birthplace of a lot of the Chicano movement, St. Mary's. Those folks came out of there.
Okay. So now to close, we go back to media, and I was going to ask, based on your experience in and out of NAHJ, what should be done, what can be done, and what should be done to improve the status of Latino journalism?
Well, I kind of got the sense, again, as an outsider, that NHJ is reinventing itself. And, it's interesting because, at the local level, they've, I guess just recently they created a national chapter here. LA chapter here. And there's been a big promotion, and I kind of got the sense they've opened their doors. They're not as strict in terms of the requirements to be a full-time member. It's interesting because they had a reception recently at La Plaza de Cultura y Artes in downtown Los Angeles, and I went to it because I saw that was. And I went up to the then director and introduced myself and said, "You probably don't know me, but I'm one of the founding members of NHJ." And the guy was like, "Oh my God, we have a founding member here." And he made the announcement, "We have a founding member of NHJ, Robert Alaniz," because I've been so far from it for such a period of time, divorced from it, that people really don't know who I am. And then, of course, the recent national president who works here at NBC, I went and introduced myself. I said, "You probably don't know me. I'm Robert Alaniz." "Oh, wait a minute. You were one of the founding members." And it's funny because we were recently inducted, Maggie and I, and the founding members into the Hall of Fame recently. I didn't know. I missed it. That's how divorced I was until a year later, someone called me up and said, "Hey, you're in the Hall of Fame?" I said, "I am." No one called me, and it turns out someone was calling me trying to get a hold of me, but my number had changed and they didn't know where I had gone to give me the heads up because we were going to be inducted. They wanted me to go. Had I known, I would have been there, but I didn't know. So I walked up to him, and as soon as I said Robert Alaniz, he said, "Oh, we just inducted you to the Hall of Fame." So getting back to your original question, I think we really have to look at new media. I don't think we can look at what's been the traditional route for many journalists, aspiring journalists. I think we have to, in some cases, look at creating our own, because there's a limited set of opportunities within traditional media. And what I mean by that, I mean the ABCs, CBSs, NBCs of the world, the Turner broadcast companies of the world. God knows there's very limited opportunities now within print media, and I'm not suggesting that we don't look at that. I'm just looking at, maybe you want to look at new media, creating your own entity, creating your own Latino LA. I mean, there's all these websites now, they're kind of creating their own journalism stories and being supported in many cases by foundations. I know that one of my former places of employment, the California Endowment, actually supports through the USC School of Journalism. They give them like $1 million a year to get journalists to cover health-related stories, because that's their big issue, health. And so, they're creating all of these entities, these independent journalism groups, to do these sorts of policy think tank issues and cover these issues. And, so you're starting to see even the Los Angeles Times getting money from these journalism folks to do these kinds of stories. And it's funny because at the end of these health stories, you'll see a disclaimer. This story was in part due to funding from the California Endowment, but in no way does it affect our editorial content. So even newspapers are looking at private foundations to fund their efforts to bring on these kinds of folks. So I would have to say that we have to look at, in many cases, creating our own vehicles for that and looking for those funding sources. Not wanting to discourage traditional media, because, gosh, if the opportunity presents itself and you can get a job within the major networks, absolutely, or the major newspaper, please do. But if you run into roadblocks and obstacles and you're not making headway, then look at creating your own vehicle. I mean, I'm a perfect model of that in my world. I could have continued to work for a major corporation. I could have continued to work for a major foundation, or going back to an international PR firm, but I really wanted to do my own thing. I got tired of making other people money. I said, no, it's time for me to make money for myself, and I love being my own boss. So I would aspire or I would want people to aspire to do that, to look at other entities and other new media that are out there. You know, you see collaborations between networks now. You see fusion. You see other areas where there's opportunities. I mean, one of my favorite television shows now is watching Vice and all of the news they have. And you know, that's pretty independent. You know, they're not tied to the major networks. They got their own thing going. And a lot of it is counterculture to what we normally see. That's kind of the other area. And some would describe them as radical media, but I love the news stories that they do because they get to the news sources and they tell the stories without that editing that takes place from or effect from major corporations. And so, you know, let's look at new media as well as traditional media for us to move about. NHJ, I hope that they have found themselves. I hope that there's an uptick in membership. I don't know because I haven't been part of it. They've been through various executive directors now. I wish them well, and I hope that they find their place and that they go back up to the numbers that they once were, you know, in terms of membership.
Okay. Is there anything I didn't ask or anything that you would like to address?
Anything you did ask? No, other than I'd like to see a reunion of some sorts of the founding members sometime happen in the future. I don't know where or when that could happen, whether or not that could ever happen, but I'd love to be able to catch up with folks just to see how they're doing. I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing because I think it's worth capturing this kind of oral history of NHJ and how it came to be and where we are today. What the idea and thoughts were of the original founding members and some of the challenges we had early on in kind of meeting the diversity not only of the regionals, local identity versus national identity, local issues versus national issues. And I must say that, you know, it was interesting because I know that there was a time in Miami, if I just go back just a bit, a time in Miami at one of the Miami conferences when Frank Delomo, who was one of the leaders of the anti-NHJ movement because he was so tied to CCNMA, had approached me and he had found out that I had the presidential suite at the hotel. I had made nice with the woman who was in charge of reservations, and she had actually come out here a couple weeks before we were due in Miami. And I had said to her, you know, as we say in our business, hey, if you're ever out here, look me up. And she took me up on it. And I took her on a tour of Los Angeles and showed her the sights and got her into Hollywood hip nightclubs and everything. She just loved it. So when it was time for me to check into the hotel, I remember I flew back with Marilena Salinas, and she was very sick at the time, and she was catching a cold, and she was leaning on my shoulder on the flight back, and she was coming down with a cold. And so when we got there, it was time to go to dinner, and she didn't really want to go to dinner, so I invited my friend who's the head of reservations for this hotel. It was the Omni Hotel. And, you know, as she said, what room did you get in? He says, oh, you know what? Let me see if I can get you a presidential suite. You can do that? Yeah, so she got me so I was on the top floor. I had this top floor all to myself, beautiful view of, you know, the bay and you know, huge room and you know, to accommodate people. So Frank got hold of it and he came to me and says, I heard you got a nice room. I said, I do. He says, well, we need to have a meeting, CCMA board, and it had to do with what they were going to vote on in terms of membership for this stuff. So I remember I gave them my room. And here comes all the CCMA folks, you know, Julio Moran and Henry Mendoza and Frank Delomo and all those folks. And I said, you know what, I'm going to step, this is your meeting, I'm stepping outside. So I remember using that meeting. So they came out, and whatever happened that night must have been a real political burner for these guys, because I remember that night there was a little bit of a pleito. The CCMA folks were having a little bit too much tequila in this club in the hotel, and there was kind of like, you know, we're number one, and no one's ever gonna put us down, and El Mexicano, and you know, and you get the Cubans over here and the Puerto Ricans over here, and they're kind of looking at what's going on. And I think that was just kind of a direct result of the CCMA not wanting to let go of their identity and still not accepting the reality that NHJ was coming into its own. It was going to be created, and it was going to create some of the spotlight away from CCNMA. So I tell that story because there was not only the differences in the organizations, but also because CCNMA was predominantly Mexicano, Chicano, Hispanic, whatever you want to call it, but of Mexican origin. You kind of saw that at this Miami event that occurred, and it was just kind of interesting to see that happen. On the upside, as that happened, this was at like a pre-event for the dinner. Because I had the suite, I had the CBS party at my room because I had it. So that night it was a big party that went on till like 3 o'clock in the morning. And I remember people kept sending people up to my room. I had no idea who was there, and my bar was running out. You know, I had a certain budget that CBS paid, and I never did see the final budget, but I'm sure that someone in corporate probably went through the roof when they saw the final tabulation on how much booze was handed out during that party. I bring that up because after everything was said and done, there was unity in my party. I don't know if it's because the view of Miami or because the booze was flowing a little bit better, and it had some time to digest and have dinner, and maybe some of the animosity died down a little bit. But I think people decided we were still one people, one organization with some mutual goals in mind. So that was one of those sidebar stories that I had to share with you because it's funny now when I look back at it.
So I thought it was interesting that the term anti-NHJ movement.
Yeah.
So there was a pattern.
And it was predominantly driven by the old guard at CCMA. Not so much the new guard, but the old guard. Because quite frankly, there were those folks who were going to have double membership. They were going to join NSJ and they were going to be part of CCMA. But you had some of the old guard who said, we'll never be members of NSJ. We're CCMA till they die, and now they've changed their name, And affiliation, they used to be affiliated with USC. Now I think they're affiliated with ASU. So, they've changed, and I've seen that organization dwindle down as well too. It's almost to a part where it's sad, where they're having fundraising problems. Their membership is driven. I remember one time I got Walmart to be a sponsor of one of their dinners, and went to the dinner, and it was so boring, and there were so little people there. Walmart said to me, "We don't want to sponsor this again. It's just not a good place to be." And it wasn't their fault. I think it was more that they just didn't see the benefit of going in support of the organization. And a lot of it was because unfortunately, it was a sad turnout for the organization. It wasn't their finest hour. Their program was a little too long. People were talking too long, so it wasn't enjoyable. So Walmart said, we don't mind giving money this one time, but we probably won't be back the following year. And I remember having a conversation with Julio Moran and saying, you need to change first of all, don't do it on a Friday, because corporate people they want to go home on Friday. Do it during the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Do it early on, and don't have your program drag on so long. And my God, don't let the journalists speak, because they go on and on and on about themselves. One person was up there for 15 minutes talking about herself. I'm like, oh, really? Why don't you just get up, accept the award, be gracious, and say thank you? It's like the Oscars, You don't need to go into this whole history of your involvement in journalism. So I guess when given the opportunity, journalists love to talk about themselves, and this was an opportunity to talk to her about herself to her peers. But for corporate America, not a good thing,
Okay. Is there anything else you would like to remark?
No, just thank you for the opportunity. I'm so glad you reached out to me, and I'm so glad you're talking to my colleagues. And if you do see Jay later, please give him my regards. I'd love to catch up with him one of these days. And again, hopefully one of the days we'll have a reunion before it's too late for many of us who are still alive, So I miss a lot of that was probably one of the finest times of my life when we had that opportunity to bring AHA together and give it birth. I think I was probably one of the milestones of my life that I'll always remember, and thankful that I had the opportunity to be part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.